Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to talk about my worst books of the year. I'm going to do this video slightly differently than I have done in years past. I am not going to be featuring only my lowest rated books in this video and ranking them. So if you are interested in my lowest rated books of the year, these are all of my 1 stars and these are all of my 2 stars. So those are my lowest rated books of the year. Some of those will be featured in this video, some of them will not be. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to talk through the books that I am disappointed in, that I am mad at how they turned out for various reasons. That's what we're going to do in this video. Some of them are going to be 1s and 2 stars, some of them are going to be 3s. You'll just have to wait and see. I'm excited though because as I was creating this list, I could just feel like the frustration in me growing. So most of these books were books that I highly anticipated or that I was very excited about that I found them, and clearly they did not hit the mark when it came to what I was expecting. So I'm not going to rank these in any particular order with the exception of this first one, which is by far my most disappointing book of the year. And I think this is the only book on this list that has been in a couple of like my recent videos. And so everything else should be new for you guys. But this one, I can't not have it on my worst books of the year. And that is The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt. I rated this a 1 star. This book is absolutely atrocious. And I am so upset that the premise of this book didn't deliver because it is an absolutely amazing premise. I thought that it was going to be a 5-star all-time favorite for me, and it disappointed. So if you haven't heard me talk about this book, you follow Harriet Hunt, who is in a situation because her father goes missing and she lives with her father on his estate in a society where women are not allowed to own property without men. And so she is going through all of these scenarios trying to figure out how can she keep her home when her father is not home and people come knocking looking for him. So she's worried about that. She also has a garden at this home that is a little bit unruly in a peculiar way, hence The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt. It has a mind of its own, a personality, it moves, and she's concerned that everyone else will find out about this garden because it's not a typical thing. Magic is not something that people expect in this world by any means. And so it sounds like an amazing situation to write a story of women empowerment and like women independence, but no. The main character in this, Harriet Hunt, is just a mess, and she absolutely has had horrible traumas in her past, which I don't mind having in stories, but we see absolutely no growth from her. And she will tell you that she is making decisions that she knows people are making for her or pushing her into, and then she will say, I'm going to change XYZ, or I'm going to make my own decisions, or I'm going to go out and I'm going to do these various things to make sure that I can claim agency over my life. And then she does the opposite, or she just sits there and waits for other people to make decisions for her. What? Like, why? Why are we doing this? And she's also very naive for reasons. Like, there are legitimate reasons why she would not know how the world works. But then she will talk about later on, after she's made decisions that she knows were not the correct path, she'll explain why she knew that they weren't correct. And I'm like, so you weren't naive, you were just dumb. Like, you're just making decisions that you know are inevitably going to lead you to failure. Cool. That's definitely what I want to see. Clearly, I'm not a fan, so okay, let's move on. Maybe I'll be less fiery about the next book. The next book on this list is Cascade Failure, which I also rated 1 star. So I do have some of my 1 stars in here. This book I was so excited about, not only because the cover is just absolutely amazing, but it features, this is a sci-fi book featuring a ragtag gang of individuals who are supposed to be solving some type of a mystery or going on a journey to like take down corruption type of a story. You are following the main, well, like I said, there's a cast of characters, but the person you're in the perspective of first, his name is Jowl, I think. And he is on the run from the guild. You find out about his past throughout the rest of the story. There are three main factions within this universe. You have the Trust, the Union, and the Guild. And the Guild are kind of the police of the universe, trying to make sure that everyone else stays above board. They don't always succeed. And so Jal is on the run from these individuals and ends up at the very beginning of the story on a guild ship. And this guild ship has people that he has been friends with or acquaintances of in the past, and they are going to take him in after they find out that he's on board. But in the meantime, while they are trying to transport him to like the main facility that he would be tried and judged or whatever, they run into a distress signal and go out to this planet that has just been obliterated. But there is someone here calling for help, and that is the mystery they end up investigating. Jal comes along with them for the investigations because he's on board. And so it sounds like an interesting story, right? I was so confused by the characters of this storyline. I buddy read this with Leandra, and there were numerous times where both of us would ask the question of, are these people supposed to be in like in a sexual relationship, or does it just feel this way? And like there were moments where I'm like, is the main character gay? Is the main character polyamorous? Oh wait, no, they're all just friends. Or oh wait, no, they treat each other like father and son. It was very bizarre how many times in the story I was confused by the relationships that were happening, and it does not get resolved. Also, where the story leads and the villain of the story, or at least one of the villains of the story, does not make sense, is not consistent with their character throughout the entire storyline. And that's all I'm gonna say about that. I was very disappointed by this. It just, every time I think of it, it makes me mad. The next book I have to mention also made me mad, but probably less so because I didn't finish it. This was a DNF. I do have 2 DNFs on this list, and this one is A Short Walk Through a Wide World. This was a debut, and I was so excited because the book touts itself as, or for fans of The Invisible Life of Addie Larue, which is one of my all-time favorite books. I love the vibes of that storyline and the kind of traveler's heart that you have to have in that story. And this has all of the buzzwords, I guess, for that. You are following a young girl who, at the very beginning of the story, finds out or is grievously wounded by something, some entity. And I think I read to 55%, so I got halfway through this story. So she's grievously wounded. They go to the doctor to try and figure out what's wrong with her, because it's not like a wound you can see. And once they've moved away from their house, she gets better, and which is weird. And they start driving back to her house. She starts getting sicker. She determines, as a very young girl, I think she was 9 at the beginning of the story, that it's because of the location. And if she goes back to any locations that she has been, she will get sick and inevitably die. And so that was the first kind of chink in the armor of this story, is the fact that this girl, who's 9 years old, was smarter than any of the adults in the room with what was going on with her, with no information as to why. There's also some magical component that's going on in the storyline that I won't even get into because it wasn't important for most of what I read. I'm sure that it had a point inevitably, but we also had her traveling. So because she can't stay in the same place without dying, her mother travels with her. As a 9-year-old, you would think you would need parental supervision or whatever. And she travels with her until the age of 11. And at the age of 11, this young girl decides that she has torn her family apart and she wants her mother to go back home. So she runs away from her mother. And her mom does end up going back home. She visits her family once a year. She has trouble remembering things. She can't remember time. She doesn't remember how old she is. And she magically makes it in this world at 11 years old. She learns how to build a spear and spear a wild boar in the middle of the woods without any prior knowledge. The character, her, and you're with her the entire time. her character doesn't make sense. The magic system that they try to introduce doesn't make sense. And at the very beginning of this book, the author specifically says, oh, how is it worded? There was a line it was when she was diagnosed with her illness. There was a line in the book that said, some things are better off not understood. And that is the premise for this book. They are going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you and they're never going to explain why, because it's better not to know. No, that's not how you write stories. If you're going to come up with a premise and you have this illness, it should be explained. There should be things that are explained. There's also like time components, there's dual timelines, but they're not well developed. And because the character herself has issues with time, those get confusing. No. Let's talk about another DNF. Why not just get both of them out of the way? This is How to Become a Dark Lord and Die Trying. This one I was also over 50%. I think I got to like 51 or 52% and decided like, no, I can't do this for another, I think it's a 16-hour audiobook and I read 8 hours and I was like, I can't do this for another 8 hours. This book, you follow a main character who is originally supposed to be the hero of her story, and she has died and come back to life so many times trying to defeat this villain that she just gets tired of it and decides that she's going to be the villain herself. Like, that's the premise of the book. Think of it like a game, like a video game that you're playing, and you can't defeat the level. That's what this story is, essentially. So every time she dies, she starts back at where she began the story, and you repeat. And the humor in this is absolutely atrocious to me. It's not funny. It's exhausting, in my opinion. And also the main character was over-sexualized. She is a lesbian character who, even when she's being tortured, is thinking about sex, and I don't understand why that needed to happen. It didn't make sense. And I think it was trying to add to this like crass female main character, kind of like the absurdity of it all, but I just thought it made her annoying. And while like I would try and engage, there were certain parts of the story that I'm like, okay, I could see like this being kind of like a D&D game. And I would kind of get into it, and then we would have this random comment about her thinking of this person that has a snake tongue in a sexual way. I'm like, okay, like what? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but when I'm playing World of Warcraft, I don't think about having sex with one of the characters. Like, it's not something I do while I'm playing video games. So I don't know, it was very bizarre. Like I said, I didn't like the humor. This is not for me. Next on this list, I'm very sad that it's on here. This is a Battle of the Booktubers recommendation. I'm sorry, Jess, but I have to put Hounded on this list. I was very disappointed by not enjoying this because this series, I think this is the series that has been recommended to me the most on BookTube by subscribers, by friends on BookTube. People who've read this thought that I was going to love it, and I did not enjoy this. This was a 1.5 star. And I also had issues with the sexuality in this, like the sexualization of female characters specifically by the main character. If you haven't heard of Hounded, this is the Iron Druid trilogy, or not trilogy, series. It's got like 16 books or something ridiculous, but you're following a druid who's, I think he's like 1200 years old. He's in modern day, and he has like an arch nemesis that he's trying to hide from, and inevitably gets found, and you have to follow like the storyline there. This is a world that is massive. There are so many gods. You have all of the Norse gods, Roman gods, you have Greek mythology, you have Jesus Christ. Like, all of these gods are roaming the earth, and that was kind of cool. You also have like dwarves and goblins and demons and like all these different things that are mixed up in this world. And I do think that had those items been better developed and spent more time on, I would have enjoyed it more. But it seemed like the author just dropped these things in and then we would move on. It was almost like, and none of it was, like, a lot of them weren't defined. I was supposed to just know what the, Roman god of poop was. I don't know. Like, It was very bizarre how certain things were just dropped in. But yeah, the main character had, well, it just wasn't the main character. It was also some of the other characters. Like, sex would just get mentioned randomly. My favorite character in the entire book was the Morrigan Crow, which is supposed to be a goddess of death. And a lot of her scenes were very serious and severe and kind of interesting, being in the head of a god who clearly doesn't understand mortality and humanity in general. But then at the very end, there was a scene particular, and this isn't a spoiler because it's not telling you anything about the plot, but there was a scene with her that she sexualized the main character. It was very strange and out of character, but things like that would happen throughout. Even the dog in the book has a moment. And I'm like, why? This book was published in the early 2000s, and I know that was a trend back then, but it's just not for me. I also think that the two main characters, the Iron Druid and his dog, were both very childish characters, snarky, sarcastic, and also kind of dumb, in my opinion. And I think it was too much of that kind of obnoxious behavior. I needed something to help me cope with that. And so had the two main characters been contrasting, one more serious and grumpy and then the other kind of bumbling and sarcastic, I would have been better with it. But since it was just constant obnoxious behaviors, it got a little old to me. The next one is Chilling Effect, which I ended up rating, I think, a 3.25. It was a 3-star. So this was not a terrible book by any means, but it is disappointing because this book is a space opera, which is something I have learned that I enjoy, of a female captain who ends up transporting psychic cats. Which just sounds fantastic. Unfortunately, the cats aren't a huge part of the story. They do take some part, but you follow our main character whose sister ends up getting kidnapped, and she has to sign up for some missions to make money in order to free her sister. That's like the main premise of what's happening. And she has a crew of individuals who have done missions together before and delivered transport. Like they'll sign up for different contracts to deliver things to different ports. And so one of the things that they sign up for is to deliver these psychic cats to another planet. And they are fun. Like, that was probably my favorite part of the entire story, is the psychic cats and how they interact with the the ship, because they try and contain them and they end up getting out. But what I didn't enjoy is, like, there are a couple of different villains and like storylines throughout this, but the main culprit, I think, of a lot of our captain's travels and journey throughout the story is an alien who does not like the fact that she did not accept his advances. Man, there's a theme here, I think, in my hated books. He like comes on to her at a bar and she essentially tells him to like go away, and he gets offended, and the entire book, and I'm not kidding, the entire book, he chases her and tries to do horrible things to her because she didn't accept his advances. We couldn't have come up with a better reason for an alien person who has way too much power to be after this girl. I don't know. I was a little disappointed with that, and it comes up so often that it just completely derailed the story for me, and I didn't really care about anything else that was happening because this was the like main reason for all of the chaos. It was kind of dumb. Next, we have Dreadful, which this was another, I think, 3-star. I think it was just a 3.0 for me. But I was very excited about this book because it follows another Dark Lord. This is actually, I read this prior to reading How to Become a Dark Lord, I think. I'm pretty sure I read this one first. And you are following a Dark Lord who wakes up in a bedroom in the middle of this castle with goblin minions, and he doesn't remember who he is. And he figures out that he is the evil villain of this story, but he has no idea how he got here or why he is here or why, like, what his plan is. Like, And he clearly is wrapped up in some pretty big kingdom things, and he has to figure out his way through it. This was also in the description, it says that this is for fans of T. Kingfisher. And so that part, because it's supposed to be funny and clever, is how the main character is described. And he's not. The entire story, he is a bumbling idiot. I understand, like, if you wake up without any knowledge of who you are or why you're there, that you're going to have some struggles, but he has no critical thinking skills or problem solving skills. He's literally just bumbling around until he stumbles into an answer. And a lot of the times it's his goblin minions who are supposed to be the quote unquote idiots of the character, or idiots of the storyline, that end up helping him, which that part, the goblins were very fun, and seeing how mistreated they were, and in like other circumstances, and with him, they kind of found a little bit of sanctuary, at least. Well, I think that's all I'm going to say about that, but they were kind of the saving grace. But him being the main character and being so dumb, I didn't care. Like, and I didn't believe that he was able to get himself out of certain situations, because he seemed like a very incapable human being. So how could he get himself out of these very large and dire situations that you end up going through? The next one I did forget. I did also mention this one in my new releases video, my ranking new releases video. This is The Sky on Fire by Jen Lyons. And this has to be one of my most disappointing reads, because this was one of my most anticipated. I rated this a 3.25. I was so disappointed in the characters specifically in this storyline. I can't really describe to you what this book does, because if you read the synopsis, it's not really how the storyline goes. You're following a main character who is supposed to be exiled and executed by a village, I think 17 years ago. She ended up surviving, and she's on the run, and they end up chasing her down. But that's not where that ends. The story pivots like 5 or 6 times at the very beginning. I have a vlog that goes through a whole bunch of details, so if you're interested in that, I'll link that in the cards and down in the description. But yeah, this is a heist story at its heart, if you guys are interested in heist stories. But really the only thing I liked about this story is the dragons. Everything else kind of sucked. The characters, I didn't care who died. There were no character arcs or character development. I didn't really even care about the heist and what they were trying to steal, even though that did have some information or something to do with the dragons. But I didn't care about that either. The conflicts in this are also resolved so quickly. And there was a lot of buildup to some events that just kind of fizzle out and die at the end of the book. So yeah, not my favorite. I would definitely recommend Chorus of Dragons over this. And if you didn't like Chorus of Dragons, you might not like this either. I don't know. This was not for me. The next on this list is The Haunted Forest Tour, which is essentially a Jurassic Park-like story, except for it features a haunted forest that has a whole bunch of monsters and everything around it. So the very beginning of the storyline, you have this gruesome encounter where trees jump out of the ground and kill a whole bunch of people in this little tiny town, and the government has no idea why it happened or how it happened. And they know that there are all these monsters and horrible things in it. So they shut down like all of the area around it. They rope it off. Nobody can go into the forest. And eventually people find a way to make money out of it, and they build these trams, and you can go for a tour in the forest. And on Halloween night, the tram that goes out has some issues. And I think what was so disappointing about this storyline is that the beginning of the book was fantastic. The creative ways that the authors of this book have made for people to die was great. It's very gruesome, so if you're not into gore, I would not read this. But I found that part fascinating. The initial trials that they have to go through once, the thing that happens to the tram ends up happening, and like how people adapt to the situation. Where it went wrong for me is like the reveal at the end of the book. It's so predictable, but in a bad way. about what happens and why, that I was very frustrated, because the beginning of the story, like I said, was very creative, and for it to end in such a mundane way, it was not satisfying. The last book that I'll mention is The Rivers of London. This is a fantasy mystery, which is why I picked it up. This is actually another buddy read with Leandra, and we were both so excited about it because it's about a detective in London who can see ghosts, and there are some like gods and mythology involved as well. And it sounded good. It was going to be like a detective story set in a historical environment, and has a paranormal setting, which I find fascinating, and I usually enjoy stories like that. This fell victim once again to being written in the early 2000s again, because the way female characters are described in this story is just gross. I don't need to hear about the curves and how things move and see, like, I don't need descriptors about the female body in the way that this book did, and in very unnecessary thing. Like, it didn't add to the story at all. There was no reason to do it. It was just that the main character was observant in that way, I guess. Which that in itself is why I found this book disappointing, because it had so much else to offer. It was also a little dry. It's written with British humor, and so with that I do think comes some dryness, but that impacted, or that paired with the sexualization of the female characters, just annoyed me. And it's a chonky book as well, and so there was a lot of pages to get through. Needless to say, I will not be continuing with this series, which is unfortunate because I know that it is beloved by a lot of people. I think the 10-year anniversary edition came out, which is why it ended up coming up on my radar. So anyway, those are the 10 worst books that I read in 2024. I promise my next video will be more positive, but you know, I love a good rant every once in a while, and I hope you guys do too. Speaking of rants, if you guys would like to let me know your worst book of the year, put it in the comments down below. Even if it's a book that you know I've loved, I like to hear it when people disagree and the reasonings for why they don't like their books. If you're not feeling chatty, but you just want to let me know that you're here, leave a little frowning emoji in the comments so I know that you're here with me in spirit. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.